May Jesus be praised, and onward with Mary. A good and holy day to you all, my dear children, in the sacred hearts of Jesus and Mary, and in the most chaste heart of Saint Joseph. Well, hello again with our morning column, Saints and Coffee. Today is Tuesday, the 26th of November, and the Church celebrates the feast day of a monk who founded an abbey in Fano, in the Marche region, who, after seeing a cousin decomposing, after he had been exhumed, realized that he said to himself, he was like me, I will be like him. We're talking about Saint Sylvester the Abbot, founder of the Sylvestrine Benedictine monks, named after him. He was a saint who lived in the 13th century, well known for driving out demons. He was a man of prayer, in fact an exorcist. As we know, it's a role played, a ministry. The ministry carried out on behalf of the bishops. That is, it's the bishops who decide who should be an exorcist. Actually, in the past, an exorcist, who was a member of a minor order, should be a man deeply immersed in communion with God, in prayer. It seems to me that a couple of exorcists should reflect on this, especially since they're with Bergoglio's false church. I wonder how they manage it. To see the devil where he clearly isn't, and not to see him where he is. That's the dreadful situation we're living through. May Saint Sylvester, exorcist from heaven, intercede for them. Right then, so today's Tuesday, and so tonight at 9 o'clock, War Tuesday, there's the episode, don't miss it. War Tuesday, the new true Pentecost, the true church and the false church. Share it on the Radio Domina Nostra YouTube channel, where I invite you to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're finishing my book. This should be the second to last or third to last episode from my book, The True Church, the False Church, and Its Destiny, which you can get when I'm around for these apostolic meetings. Or ask the Radio Domina Nostra Secretariat. Besides, as I've said many times, it's a reissue of a book I prophetically wrote way back in 2017. This evening, there's this important episode, the new Pentecost. That is, we're in a time in which, precisely because of the so-called Benedictine turning point, and this is something I invented, discovered, and explored, that is, Benedict XVI, with his gesture of February 2013, made a turning point. He created a turning point foreseen by the prophecies. The Church, becoming a small flock, remains the Catholic Church, but abandons the structures occupied by the heretical apostates of Satan. It remains the Catholic Church, but forced to gather again, fine by us, in hotels, paying. The Catholic Church remains persecuted, ghettoized, humiliated, bombarded from all sides. This is the turning point that Benedict XVI brought about. But it's obvious that this turning point leads the Church back to its origins, the Church of the origins. Because essentially we, the Church historians, from this point of view, agree with the undersigned because I draw from them. We can see many turning points, many paradigm shifts in the history of the Church. But essentially, there were two gigantic, clamorous, and decisive ones. That of Pentecost, which constitutes the beginning of the announcement of the gospel throughout the world, with Paul going into the Mediterranean, and then Constantine's turning point in 313 when the Church attempted to reimburse the Church. Car journey, then it stops in the room, comfortably seated. Nothing's to be done. Right. I wanted to tell you that I'm in the snow. I was worried about not getting back in the car, even though I have about 3 hours of driving ahead, and then the signal still cuts out. It really takes a lot of patience. I was saying, the Constantinian shift, the Church slowly becomes, bear with me, I think it's designed to lose viewers. I might be wrong, because all these interruptions, every day, every day, every day. And yet the director has a good signal. Back to us. I was saying that the church, from being a persecuted church, and look, for about 300 to 450 years Christians were considered in the same way as we of the little remnant are considered today, that is, sectarians, fanatics, to be persecuted, dangerous. In Italy, we are the only ones for the Italian bishops to persecute. Then they shake hands with anyone. It's yesterday's news that Monsignor Olivero, whom I recommend to you, the Bishop of Piedmont, now the name of the diocese near Saluzzo escapes me. The Bishop of Pinerolo said that, for this very reason, though they deserve it, it would be better to replace religious instruction at school with an hour of interfaith studies. Right? So these are the Italian bishops, interfaith, not just Jesus Christ and the church, but everything, the melting pot of syncretism. This one wants to become a cardinal at all costs. There's no doubt he wants to become a cardinal because he's more progressive than Bergoglio. This church starts to become a state church, an official church, and the era begins that will lead to the ancien regime, when being a bishop meant being a prince, being a cardinal meant being the cardinal, and then let's not talk about the Pope, who in the Renaissance took on the almost imperial contours. All this ended again in 2013. So then historians can verify if I'm right in saying that we're in the presence of a decisive paradigm, which is perhaps apocalyptic. That is, it could prepare, I don't know if you're following me, this is important, it could prepare the turning point I've talked about, which I call in my book, Church, Where Are You Going? At the end, I talk about a turning point, Benedictine by Pope Benedict XVI, who write in 2013, 313 Constantine, 2013 Benedict XVI, led the church, not by his own choice, but because that's how God wanted it, back to the situation before the Constantinian shift. So the Constantinian shift and the Benedictine shift. With the Benedictine turn, the church returns to what it was before Constantine, a church no longer of the state, a church no longer, because look, it's truly incredible. I see the images because I pay attention of the bishops who are around Italy, the Italian bishops. They celebrate Mass on Sundays in some parish. There are the Carabinieri, the mayor with his family. Most of these people don't set foot in church. They don't live a life of grace. Many times they make laws in favor of abortion, euthanasia, divorce, and civil partnerships. But then at Mass, they're all there with their tricolor sashes to pay homage to the bishop, various pleasantries, all stuff that, even as a child, I remember feeling that God doesn't appreciate this. God doesn't want this. God wants a church that doesn't align itself with the current system. Because the moment the church aligns itself with the current system, it ceases to be the salt of the earth. The church is either persecution or it's not the church. Want to know if you're loved by Christ? So see, if you're persecuted, look, that's how it is. You can't please the world if you want to please Jesus Christ. You can't please people if you want to please the gospel. That's the fact. Right? This evening, I want to show that the new Pentecost is just like the first Pentecost. But we'll talk about that this evening. Don't miss the appointment at 9 o'clock on Radio Domina Nostra's YouTube channel.
Come vedete dalla finestra che il regista adesso vi mostra, Resistenza, I preti eroi di Francia e il piccolo resto oggi. Quindi serve a capire un po' come la Chiesa ha conosciuto sempre, grazie a Dio,
the anti-system, the anti-narrative, the anti-logi, I'd almost say, to use a Greek term dear to the Word of God, the anti-logi. There's opposition. Jesus came to earth, we're starting to prepare for Christmas, and practically immediately he understands he must flee to Egypt because they want him. And yet it was only a cry, the cry of God made flesh, perfect, yet only a cry, because he was hungry. It was the cry of God on earth, you understand? And the anti-Christian powers, the satanic anti-logies, understood that something was there, presumably not that it was God, because they didn't know it immediately. St. Jerome says that the Madonna married Joseph to hide from the devil that she was the Holy Virgin. Anyway, Jesus is persecuted straight away, and what do we expect? good, kind, beautiful. That's what the church is doing all over Italy today. And they have empty churches, a dying Christianity, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank Don Ramon, who kept the Il Punto column. You can find it on the Radio Domina Nostra playlist. A wide-ranging reflection on the Mass celebrated by Don Ramon last night. I'd encourage you to listen to it, because it's really very interesting. I recorded it last night at 9 p.m., but you can find it on the Radio Domina Nostra playlist. I got back from France yesterday, and as you saw from the post I made yesterday with a photo on Radio Domina Nostra and my Facebook profile, I found myself in the Aosta Valley, full of snow. And gradually, I'm getting closer to the meetings starting tomorrow. Tomorrow we're in Genoa at 16:30. At the Holiday Inn Hotel, 47 Milan Street. The program includes the Rosary, Holy Mass, Eucharistic Adoration, and Benediction. Thursday, 28th of November, we're in Turin. The day after tomorrow, Pacifico Hotel, Firmino Street, number 36. Friday begins the Immaculate Conception Novena. Tomorrow's the Miraculous Medal Feast. I urge Genoese and Ligurians, don't miss this event. It's a weekday, so I know it won't be as packed as Saturdays and Sundays, but we might still get a few surprises. For example, at last week's weekday meeting in Bologna, we booked the smaller hall. It was smaller than the other one, it's true, but it was full, even on a weekday, at an unusual time, like 4:30. So we can expect the same in Genoa and Turin. Friday, November 29th, in 3 days, the Immaculate Conception Novena starts. We prepare for this dogmatic solemnity. Certainly opposed and disbelieved by Bergoglio's false church. I believe Bergoglio doubts the Immaculate Conception. He doesn't see Mary as sinless, though he claims to, but acts otherwise. Have you ever seen Marian devotion? Where is it? Where's Marian devotion? Then, for goodness sake, I turned on the telly for a bit yesterday, and goodness me, I regretted it. Will this violence against women ever stop? Yes, it's true. But you can't think that the President of the Republic, the Prime Minister, the Pope, who isn't the Pope, the President of the European Union, etc., should be the ones to do it. It seems to me personally that there's a whole system with criteria to be observed, so they're all in power. Domestic violence certainly exists, but are we sure it's only the men's fault? Are we sure? I know I'm going against the grain, I realize, but are we sure there's no responsibility in education, at school, regarding how our girls behave? When a young woman... Right, I'll stop here. The topic's getting long and time's short. Yes, the Immaculate Conception Novena starts Friday, November 29th. It's 4:30 in Zola Predosa at the Costantino Urban Art. What a crazy week. This is... On Saturday, November 30th, second Novena Day, we're at Trento's Sporting Hotel at 4:30. And on Sunday, the 1st of December, in Udine, in Palmanova San Marco Auditorium, Scamozzi, SB Street, always at 4:30 p.m. For the second Sunday, I think it is, of Advent. It's not here yet. First, it's Tuesday, first Sunday of Advent, so we're getting ready for the Lord's Christmas right here in the deep north. How interesting that today I'm on the far eastern side of the Western Alpine Arc, and then on Sunday I'll be on the opposite side in Friuli Venezia Giulia. Ah, beautiful Italy. But when I go abroad, I thank God for being born Italian, Sicilian, and Italian. I'll tell you the truth. France is perfect. France is a nation. Then the French Republic is everywhere. It's something... It's impressive. The motorways are like something out of PlayStation. I don't know if you agree. It's all so perfect, well designed, well organized, but it lacks that Mediterranean feel, that Tuscan feel, that Venetian feel, you know? Because the Italian regions come together in a kind of artistic confederation, in my opinion. I'm very patriotic about this. I'd really like Italy to have a stronger sense of self, a Christian Italy. You know, the whole world envies Rome for this. The French president who thinks they're top of the class, I don't know. It's like when I got top marks in my classical high school leaving exam, and the nerdy girls, the ones who got 9s and 10s all year, well, when they didn't get top marks, only I did, in the whole classical high school class. They were as angry as the French, like my classmates, who couldn't accept that Dominatella, back then, only Dominatella got 60, which was top marks back then. Now it's 100, back then it was 60. And France is like that with Italy, in my opinion, honestly. But the experience I had in France was wonderful. As you know, we've already talked about it. Remember to help us out. We book venues, pay for them, travel, everything. It all costs. When you pay, the doors open. You understand? Sometimes the doors of the heart too. When you pay, the doors open. When you don't pay, they stay shut. So, there's the account and IBAN you know well. Please help. We really need you now. I think I've said everything. I shouldn't need to add anything else, it seems. So, let's finally get to today's episode, which picks up a bit from yesterday's. The title, as I mentioned, is Resistance, the Priest Heroes of France and the Little Rest Today. Throw it into the debate, because they're troublemakers who, incidentally, say nothing, but it's important to start from what they ask themselves. Why did Don Minutella dispense the sacrament of confirmation? Ours pretend to be ours, and then they argue, then they criticize, then they clash. We've explained before that there was a clandestine bishop in the past who seemed to be about to emerge, who gave us the oil and authorized us. As successors of the apostles, there are my fellow brothers, because if only I had seen it, if only I had said it, I think even Brother Celestine himself might have had some doubts. Let's say, they came, so nothing to add. The sodality priests can vouch for me. The fact that the bishop didn't then come out, that's not our problem. He gave us authorization when he was on our side, when he was on the right side. So we have permission, right? I'm going to scare a couple. Do you know I've got permission? No, I'm an exorcist. I'm an exorcist. Nuns here can exorcise, because when the little sisters first went to the Palestrina diocese, Monsignor Sigillini, since there were problems in the diocese, mi affidò l'incarico, he actually gave me the ministry of bishop. So because I've always been on the ball, I refused the ministry in good time, you see. I said no, and he insisted. We ended up saying goodbye, and I had the ministry of exorcist, but I said I can't because I'm from the Diocese of Palermo. But he said, what does it matter, Diocese of Palermo? I'm the bishop, and Diocese of Palestrina, I'm a successor of the apostles. I confer on you the ministry of bishop and exorcist directly. Got it? But even if we didn't have the bishop's permission, I would have still given the confirmation. I'll say why. Because the French priests, the refractory ones, some figures show that 200 of them had their heads cut off. They suffered, but it's not talked about. It wasn't talked about much because it's a political, non-political issue, you understand? But it's a whole page to discover. For now, I'm discovering it like this. He was saying in the car yesterday, when you find the time, I find it, like that song Day and Night, right? I'd like to tell you, let's go in order. These refractory priests, practically think about it. These refractory priests. I said it yesterday, if you don't want to understand, go away instead of arguing at every step. But what are they doing in the little that's left? Saboteurs posted in the heart. At every step, they question themselves. But do you have the bishop's permission? But are they idiots? Does it reflect people? But mass is mass. There's nothing you can do. Do you have the bishop's permission? Do you have permission? But what bishop? Thank God, we've got the permit. Permission to confer the sacrament of confirmation, the clandestine bishop who gave it to us. Then if he hasn't come out, it's his business. Told us we could do it because we're in times of persecution. like the French priests, who in fact, without even the permission of the bishops, who were all constitutionalists, legitimists, that's what they're called, isn't it? The French high clergy's legitimism, who revered Napoleon more than Jesus Christ, you understand? And the French Revolution is a republican constitution, and the bishops were all apostates, because that's what Pius VI had established. Who were the priests supposed to ask for holy oil and confirmation rites? In barns, on farms, in the stables they celebrated, and there they held a great feast, because there were baptisms, like on a Sunday in Reims. Have people grasped the paradigm shift? But I'm fed up with this rabble, I assure you it bothers me, because they're neither fish nor fowl, they need to be thrown up. I know I've got a temper, but it's normal. So the Lord is setting me straight. They're off to be sick. They haven't understood a thing. Exactly those who have been with us for years haven't understood a thing. Ah, but have you the bishop's leave? But you deficient thing, what bishop? Which bishop, Delpini? To Battaglia? To the office? I did some fitness this morning. You know, I had a moment on my bike when a bloke like Lorphus walked in. I swear for a moment the bishop visited. So, we have the bishop's permission, because he gave it to us. Let my brothers of the Brotherhood know that sic stanibus rebus, while previously they caused difficulties, now more than ever, I have no difficulty whatsoever. It's a good thing I have permission, but I do it anyway, because refractory priests, persecuted on behalf of the French Republic, did this, risking their lives. In just a minute, I'm speaking for myself now. My brothers will take on their own responsibility. There are no problems in the new haylofts, in the new stables, which are the halls, the hotels, where we meet. At least those guys did it for free. We even have to pay. In Milan, we're paying a lot of money. To see each other on Sunday, the 8th of December, I'd happily celebrate the sacrament of exorcism. I might decide to start performing exorcisms, the imperative kind, because I have the ministry given to me by a successor of the apostles. And when I replied, the little nuns are witnesses, saying they didn't want it, that was the sign that perhaps God wanted to give it to me. I never exercised it, despite the scoundrels. All the journalists wanted to make people believe that, but I never exercised it as the Church commands. But I am an exorcist, on behalf of the Bishop of Palestrina, who is still alive. So you could ask him, and if he's honest, he should say, yes, it's true. I gave him the ministry of exorcist, of course, not in writing, because then I left, but he gave it to me verbally, with witnesses. We'll keep giving Jesus sacrament. Weddings, naturally, we record everything, just like the refractory priests did. It wasn't all sweetness and light, you see. The refractory priests carried their registers with them, where they recorded baptisms, confirmations, first communions, weddings, and so on. The grace of God amongst the refractory clergy and the refractory people, who are always far more serious than a certain small, current remnant, who wants their I's dotted, their commas, and their exclamation marks. Instead, the refractory people of France, that is, the people who didn't want the legitimist priests who had sworn allegiance to the Constitution, were people with clear ideas. The priests arrived and acted as bishops, popes, and the Pope was happy because he was the true Pope. You know, you blessed children need to read a bit of history. The Pope was pleased with this and allowed. This was because he knew that he had stipulated that the Constitution should not be signed under oath, because it wasn't something to be sworn on. One had to swear on the Constitution. And so the Pope found himself facing a French episcopate that had practically apostatized in its entirety. The Pope worried, and indeed, afterwards, a patient, painstaking work was born, as only Holy Mother Church knows how to do, reforming the dioceses by sending bishops who were of a new generation, who had nothing to do with the apostasy of the oath to the clearly anti-Christian constitution, because the liturgy was being abolished. The next generation, who had nothing to do with the apostasy of the oath on the clearly anti-Christian constitution, because the liturgy was abolished. The liturgical calendar was abolished. It was a whole new secular vision that clashed with the Christian one. So, anyone who swore an oath as a priest or bishop was an apostate, And the serious people, like there aren't any around anymore. Apart from the hardcore, for me it's the hardcore of the small remainder. I bless them. I've criticized them myself in the past, considering them a bit fanatical even. But they are to be blessed, this hardcore, this stubborn small remainder, in the face of the establishment and the media. It doesn't matter if they're pro or anti-Bergoglio. They call us fanatics, Madonna worshippers, blessed 1,000 times over, those of the first hour, the second, and the last. They enter the little remnant and fanatical fans saying, "Father, we must clearly distinguish ourselves from the false church. You must celebrate the sacraments. It's not excluded that you are our guide as a great prelate." The time of prophecies, I'm increasingly convinced that they were right. Well done. So much truth. For me, this is my point of view. Then there's always, right now what I want to say is precisely that. That is, today we are in the presence of an ecclesial historical paradigm in which the situation is reproposed in a more dramatic way, as I was also talking about yesterday morning, of the French Republic, of the years of terror that persecuted the Church, that remained faithful to the Pope, and the Church that remained faithful to the Gospel. I'll give you just a few numbers. The horrible year is 1792. It should be. My collaborators among Celestino. It should be 1792. But I remember these figures very well, you see, because I collected them for you. So you should know that from June to September 1792, 1,400 people were executed in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Interesting, no? Of these 200, 200 were priests. 200 priests who refused to swear allegiance to the Constitution. Therefore, refractory priests, forerunners of the Marian Sacerdotal Association, refused to swear. 200 priests, we are only 6, refused to swear, but why only 200? Let's say thousands and thousands. How many there might have been is not exactly known, but certainly more than 70 to 80,000, perhaps even reaching 100,000 priests in France. Only 200 died. Because the historical numbers from serious studies show that 30,000 priests, a significant number, fled abroad during the Reign of Terror. This is also a choice that can be made out of charity, a choice that God inspires, that is, 30,000 priests, to avoid swearing on the Constitution and thus not becoming apostates, but who didn't feel they could speak out in favor of the people, who remained resistant, and who sought them out except for, however, 30,000. There are so many, and so one asks oneself so many questions. If it were, someone speaks of 250,000 people, it's a genocide, according to Pierre Ch''œuvre, a liberal Protestant scholar amongst other things, therefore reliable. However, 30,000 priests flee abroad, and a rather curious thing happens. Know roughly how many rebel priests there are. It's not easy, obviously, to get official numbers, but in a population exceeding several million inhabitants, almost all baptized, because we're only recently out from under the Asian regime, we're talking about no more than 1,000. And that's already a lot. Some even suggest 500. In short, these are numbers that give you pause. We're talking about priests who remove their robes to avoid being identified, dress as laymen, and travel the countryside, the suburbs of inland France, to celebrate the sacraments, including confirmation. Why? Because meanwhile, all the bishops, incredible, this is a sad page in the history of the Church, made themselves available to the whims of the Constitution. I wonder how they could have done it. Do you know Bishop Gregoire from north-central France? Heard of him? Listen to what he said. So you see that history repeats itself, what he said about the refractory priests. him an apostate? Let's hope his soul was saved. I said a few days ago, weeks ago, that Maria Simma said that Goering, one of the highest-ranking officials closest to Hitler, would have saved his soul. This one was one of those responsible for the genocide against the Jews. Then he was arrested. He was sentenced to death. He took his own life by suicide, and Maria Simma says he saved his soul. So only God knows the times and the ways. But this Bishop Grégoire, who it seems even Brother Celestine knows, said he actually defined the refractory priests like that, who, as I told you yesterday, were meanwhile risking their lives because they hadn't sworn allegiance to the Constitution. They went into the French countryside to celebrate Mass for the faithful few. Bishop Grégoire says so. They're wicked priests who deserve to be massacred, who preach massacre. They deserve to be massacred. So the bishop, are you surprised? Bishop Greg, and do you know how many martyrs have been recognized by the Church in total? 374. We don't know any of their names, though perhaps we'll talk about them in future episodes. 374 priests lost their heads to the guillotine because there were roundups, and there were also spies and traitors. History will never lack this filth, this scum of humanity, the story of traitors and spies who often meet a worse end than those they betrayed, like Judas Iscariot who betrayed our Lord. That's an excess, to say the least. Bergoglio. Now let's get into the specifics of the story. I want to read you something about what happened. On the 11th of August, 1792, his most ardent patriots were summoned to the section against the priests, and this is the one responsible of Paris, of the application of the Constitution. He gave his orders. Their armed bands, equipped with bayonets or clubs, spread out through various districts of the Saint-Sulpice parish. They gave the curious people to understand that their expedition was to seek out the enemies of the country. So the priests, the dissenters, and the faithful who refused to renounce their faith were considered enemies of the state. This often happens, that the secular arm, today it might be legal and state systems, supports the persecution against the true disciples of the Lord. It has always happened. It was easy to quickly identify who these supposed enemies were. One of the first to arrive, surrounded by his guards, was Monsignor Dulot, Archbishop of Arles. He does the church proud, Francis, one of the few bishops who refused to swear to the Constitution. This prelate, Monsignor Dulot, was one of the leading lights of the Church of France. Always in agreement with the true bishops, he had nonetheless paid them a common homage to the truth. But as if distrustful of his own strength, he had never raised his voice in particular, nor had he voiced his protests in favor of a seat so respectable as his had been since the early centuries of the Church. Wasn't so. Excuse my outdated language, not even seen in his name for one of those pastoral letters, which almost all the bishops believed they had in their dioceses at the time of the suppression of their see. The only work to come from his pen during the Revolution was an address to the king concerning the decree of 26th May, which subjected refractory priests to deportation. So this bishop felt the need, knowing that a couple of his priests had been deported for not playing ball, to write a letter to the king. He hadn't believed Mr. Dulot hesitated to publish under his name. Few French bishops showed less zeal than he did. Dulot, you'll see in the trial that if he believed he should speak very little for fear of exacerbating tempers, such silence, which could have been reproached to him, was in him neither the effect of complacency nor that of weakness. The moment the patriots, that is, the Republican Guard, appeared, the bishop approached them with the boldness and composure of a man who fully understands the worthiness of his cause. This readiness for martyrdom is truly Pentecost. Peace, calm, like St. Maximilian Kolbe, when he told his trembling brother that they were being deported to Auschwitz, let's go and do God's will. taken to the section and confined to a room there. We know about these communist things, but why don't we know the French Republicans thoroughly? There must be a reason. Priests were arriving from all around. Because of hatred, they were instructed to observe the legal distinction between priests designated as public officials, that is, those involved in public prosecution, such as bishops and so on. With their lists in hand, armed with pikes and bayonets, the nationalists went to the houses indicated to them as the residence of some refractory priest. They hunted them down, one by one, grabbing them all indiscriminately and parading them triumphantly through the streets. They bundled them into carts, and the people mocked the refractory priests who were identified. And I applauded that stupid mob, see? It was the rabble, oh my, as if the view itself had chained the Brunswick army. He yelled and whistled insults at these peaceful priests, and several times tried to snatch them from the hands of the guards surrounding them to sate their bloodlust. That is, the people, those happy with the Republic, the storming of the Bastille, the guillotining of the King of France, wanted to kill them outright. They were there, ready to spill the blood of the priests who hadn't signed the oath to the Constitution. Some honest citizens hid many of them, that is, they concealed them. Thank goodness, is this about to happen? Is something happening? Some honest citizens, I imagine I go to Verona, and there's the 𝐷𝐸ZA family who are hiding me because they're persecuting me. Where's Fra Celestino? But do you have any news that he remained in Piedmont, hidden in Saluzzo, with a family from the small remainder? But no one understood? It could. Some honest citizens hid many, and warned them well in advance so that they could escape. But when the so-called patriots spotted their prey, nothing equaled their rage. They threatened the householders and searched high and low for the ringleaders, returning again and again, redoubling their visits, especially when the priest they were hunting was named on the list. Were there lists? Nothing new, dear ones. Listed as those who had shown zero particular regard for the administration of sacraments, without the permission of the patriotic bishops. A different story altogether was that of Abbot Franier, a priest of Saint-Sulpice. He'd escaped a moment before the guards arrived, and they took the abbot of Pannonia in his place. Abbot means priest, you see. But the guards returned as many as 9 times that same day, determined to find the French abbot. Another priest, a third one, Abbé Guillaume, lived in the same parish. In his youth he'd possessed these, and his vast erudition astounded others. He proved his culture in his work, Parallel of Revolutions. The pikemen went to the house where she lived up to 3 times. Mistaking the apartment, they found there another sick priest who had long been awaiting death day by day. He was so ill. The murderers themselves, moved by compassion for his deplorable state, left him in his bed and went to report on their expedition. But they soon reappear. And despite the priest, the third priest, being unable to stand, ill, they drag him to the Republican section. It's harassment. Despite all this investigation, the killer's own fury caused them to lose a victim most precious to their rage. 3 days earlier, by procuring a scoundrel to incite a rebellion against the Lord of Pensemont, the parish priest of Saint-Sulpice, the most important figure, had already been taken into the house, and with a sword in hand, they demanded his head, saying they would cut it off immediately, not suffering the faithful to see this zealous priest publicly. They dragged him away, but he cried, "I want to die." Yet they dragged him away because he was their leader. Of these other priests, then, if the leader dies, they all die. So, 2 illustrious victims compensate the Jacobins for the damage caused by this loss. The 2 Rochefoucauld brothers, one bishop of Beauvais and the other of Saintes, arrested in their respective apartments. The assassins, being particularly malevolent towards Monseigneur of Beauvais, even left Monseigneur of Saintes free. Right? Let's skip this and move on.
Andiamo avanti. All'ingresso della chiesa,
At the
il
church
commissario
entrance,
chiamò
the commissioner called
i
each of the
preti
Carmelite
carmelitani.
priests.
Faccio salti così capite.
I'm jumping to show
Viene
you.
presa di mira una
A
chiesa
church is less
monastero
targeted than a
repubblicana
Carmelite
che non
monastery,
avevano voluto
who
giurare
refused to
sulla
swear to the
Costituzione. Sa Giovanni
Constitution.
della Croce,
John of the
Notte
Cross,
Oscura, quelli
Dark
erano
Night,
preparati.
they were ready.
Dunque li chiamano uno per uno
So they
i
call them one by one,
repubblicani,
the
e ne danno in
Republicans,
seguito
and then
la
hand them
consegna alle
over to the
guardie. Con
guards.
siffatta consegna veniva
With this
custodiato
order,
Lusinghierato
vigilance
soprattutto
was to
affinché
be
i preti
exercised to
prigionieri
prevent
non
imprisoned
comunicassero
priests
tra di
from
loro e
communicating
fossero
or
liberi di
celebrating
celebrare i sacramenti.
sacraments.
E questi ordini furono
These
puntualmente
orders were
seguiti.
carried out
Molti di
precisely.
quei generosi
Many of
confessori
those
che arrestati
generous
vennero portati al
confessors,
loro pranzo, non
arrested
avevano
before their
ancora mangiato
lunch,
nulla in tutta
hadn't
la
eaten
giornata.
anything all
Fu
day.
loro
It was
dopo
only
la
after waiting the
dichiarazione il
following
giorno
day,
seguente.
fasting.
Non era si fatta per una
It
discussione
wasn't set
crollo
up to
del
get
letto.
gold from
Passarono
beds.
perciò l'intera
So
notte
they
in
spent the whole
digiuno,
night
appoggiati
fasting, each
ciascuno a
leaning
una
against a
sedia.
chair.
Fu assegnato per quella prima
A
notte
special
l'ordine
place was
particolare a
assigned for that
Monsignor
first night to the Archbishop of Al.
Era il vescovo. Gli venne
It was
ordinato
the
di
bishop
qui
here
siamo a
in
Parigi.
Paris.
Gli venne
He was
ordinato di
ordered to be
situarsi
situated
presso
near the
alla
iron wing
ferrata
in
a
sight
vista
of the
della
main
principale
sentry.
sentinella, dove
He was
essere
to be
tenuto
kept
d'occhio.
under observation.
Non fu permesso ad alcuno
No one
di
was
mettersi in
allowed
ginocchio
to
per
kneel
pregare
to
Dio.
pray to
Avevano
God. They'd
cominciato a mettere in
started to
ginocchio e le
kneel, and the
guardie gli avevano
guards stopped
impedito.
them.
Il
The
diavolo,
devil,
proprio il diavolo,
the very
di
devil,
inginocchiarsi. E
stopped them
invece
from
degli
kneeling.
inni sacri
Instead of the
che
sacred
avrebbero
hymns,
voluto
which would have
cantare a
liked to
gloria di
sing
Dio
to the
per
glory of
concerti
that
vani,
God for whom we suffered,
dirà uno dei
one of
superstiti,
the
ci
survivors will
convenne
say,
ascoltare in
we
tutto
had
il
to
tempo
listen
della
all night
notte, mi
long.
dicevano i confessori, le
The
indiscrezioni,
professors
le
recounted
bestemmie e
the
le
guards'
sparlatene e le
vile
oscenità delle
curses
guardie.
and
Noi
obscenities.
eravamo
We were
tutti
all quiet,
tranquilli, accesa,
leaning
con
back
le
in our
mani sul
chairs,
e appoggiati
without
sopra le
saying a
nostre
word.
sedie senza proferire una parola. Perché non si è dato
Why
onore a
weren't
questi
these
martiri?
martyrs
Perché?
honored?
Per quale
Why?
motivo?
For what reason?
Conosciamo quelli dei comunisti,
We
ma
know the
soprattutto quelli che
communists'
diceva dei
aims. Why
giacobini.
not the Jacobins?
C'è un martirio dei
There's a
giacobini. Il
Jacobin
giacobinismo
martyrdom.
non è meno
Jacobinism is
crudele,
no
questa è
less
la strada,
cruel, as
ma
you are
siccome
heard.
libertà, egalità
But
e
since liberty,
fraternité,
equality,
allora
fraternity, then
passeggiavano le guardie intorno a
the
noi,
guards
ci
patrolled
tenevano
around
gli
us,
occhi
their
sempre
eyes
posti, ci
constantly on
guardavano in
us,
faccia
fear in
e
their
il loro
gaze.
principale piacere
They
era
stared into our
osservare
faces,
l'orrore che
taking
ispirava i
pleasure in
loro
witnessing the
giuramenti e le
horror
loro
inspired by
imprecazioni,
their oaths and
perché Dio
curses.
ci faceva la grazia di
Thankfully, God
essere
granted
buono
us a
sensibili alle
certain
loro minacce.
insensitivity to their threats.
Per darci un anticipato
To
piacere
give
della
us a
sorte che ci
foretaste of our
attendeva,
fate,
pensarono di
they thought to
salire
climb
passanti sulla
almost all
tribuna
onto the
e
platform
contraffare le
and
cerimonie della
counterfeit
chiesa.
church
Mentre i
ceremonies and all the
lugubi
mournful
canti scenavano una
songs,
messa da morte e
staging a
cantarono
requiem
sopra
mass
di
that they
noi.
sang over
Non
us.
sapevano gli
The
infelici
poor
che questo
souls didn't
presagio,
know
ben
that
lungi
this
dal
omen,
tormentare i nostri
far from
cuori,
testing
ci
our hearts,
indiziava quello che più
foretold what we most
desideravamo, andare in
desired to go
paradiso.
to paradise.
La mattina seguente si
The
passava quasi
following
tutta alla
morning
stessa
was
maniera,
much the
con un
same.
profondo silenzio
A
da parte
profound
nostra
silence
e i
on our
continui
part
oltraggi
and
per parte delle
continuous
nostre
insults from our
guardie. La
guards.
santità della domenica
The
accesa
sanctity
ci
of
tuttavia
Sunday,
incoraggiò a fare
however,
domanda
gave
alla
us the
processione
courage to ask the
che ci
section
fosse
if
permesso
we
di
might be
dire
allowed to
messa.
say Mass.
Dopo una ben lunga deliberazione
After
ci fu
lengthy
accordato l'ora
deliberation, we were
permesso, ma
granted
con
this,
gli
but with
intonaci
a
quasi per
caveat
vedere la
to
nostra
temper our
gioia che in
joy.
seguito non avremmo noi altra
Henceforth,
messa
only
che
a
quella del
sworn
prete
priest would say
privato.
our Mass.
Cioè,
I mean,
come si
it's a
dice,
real joke, isn't it?
la beffa. Volete la messa?
Want
Vale a
Mass?
dire un
A
prete di
priest
quelli
who
che ha
swore to
giurato sulla
uphold the
Costituzione.
Constitution will say it.
Era questo lo stesso
That's
che
what he
Dio
was telling
diceva.
us,
Registra
recording
che
this, that
noi
we'd be
saremmo
left
rimasti
without
senza
Mass.
messa. Registra a quelli che
Record
dicono
those
che
who say Don
l'impunità si
Minutella is
inventa le
making
cose.
things up.
Registra, è un
Record it.
documento
It's a
storico.
historical document.
I preti che devono essere
The priests
giustiziati
condemned to death begged the
implorano i
Republicans to allow
repubblicani che
them
possano
not to
avere non
celebrate
un
it
celebrare
themselves,
loro, ma una
but a
messa
Mass
celebrata da un
celebrated
prete.
by a
Gli
priest.
mandano il prete
They send him the
apostati,
apostate priest.
secondo la decisione del
According to the
Papa.
Pope's
Uno di questi
decision,
apostati
one of the
aveva
apostate
firmato la decisione
priests,
e
because he'd
questi
sworn to the
carcerati
resolution,
martiri
and these
dicono
imprisoned
era
martyrs
lo
say it was the
stesso per
same as
dirci
telling
che
us
noi
we
non
wouldn't
avremmo
have
avuto
Mass.
messa. Aggiungi,
Add,
letteralmente,
literally, because it
perché
was well
ben si
known
sapeva che noi
that we
avremmo
would refuse to
rifiutato
communicate
di
with these
comunicarci
schismatic,
con questi
heretical,
preti
and perjured
scismatici,
priests.
eretici e sprigiuri. Addio, adieu,
Goodbye, goodbye.
adieu,
Bye bye. Off you
adieu,
go.
andate.
Those of you who haven't understood a thing.
Niente. Avete sentito?
Did you hear that?
Avete capito chi è Dominutella?
Know who Don Minutella
Mi fa
is?
le scarpe,
He's gonna get you,
Dominutella.
Don Minutella.
Lasciamo stare i bergogliani,
Let's leave the
che prima o poi
Bergoglians
si
be.
riveleranno fino in
They'll show
fondo.
their true
Voi
colors
che
soon.
siete nel
You who are in the
piccolo
small
destra, che sapete
remainder
solo
and only know how to
criticare,
criticize
quelli che
those
mettete
who
sempre i
always dot their
puntini,
I's.
avete sentito quelli che
Did you
mettete
hear
le
about those
patate
who've
alle
gone back to
messe,
Mass
perché
because
fate
Father
fatica
Ferre
per
said go to
mandarvi le
Mass?
messe? Avete sentito?
Have you heard?
No, dico, avete ascoltato?
Didn't I say you
Andate
heard?
da Maico.
Go to 𝐦𝐚𝐿.
I preti che devono
The
morire
priests who
martiri,
should
giustiziati
die as
perché non hanno
martyrs,
giurato sulla
executed
Costituzione,
because
e
they
in
wouldn't
domenica
swear
chiedono un
allegiance to the
prete che dica loro la
Constitution.
messa in carcere.
And on
Rimandano
Sunday
i
they ask for
repubblicani
a
un
priest
prete
to say
giurato
Mass for them
e
in
loro
prison.
dicono,
The
rileggo,
Republicans send them a priest who has sworn the oath, and they say, I'll read it again, that a priest who had sworn the oath was sent, which is the same as saying that we didn't want Mass. And he adds, because it was well known that we would refuse to communicate with the schismatic, heretical, and perjured priests. Stand firm, little remnant that resists. Stand up. Come on. Cheer up. Donatella has been sent from heaven to show you the way. And we're not the first. The truth is, it's already fallen by the wayside over the centuries. Those priests who prefer to die without communion, I don't know. I don't know how I would have felt. Oh my goodness, I don't know. Today they prefer to die without receiving communion and confession because they send them an apostate priest. Go on. Go ahead and follow the pronouncements of the newcomers. Go to Mass. Go and let yourselves be filled with doubt, you see? It was the same as telling us that we wouldn't attend Mass because it was well known that we would refuse to take communion with the schismatic, heretical, and perjured priests. Communion with schismatic, heretical, and perjured priests. What would those be, Bergoglio and Pope Francis? You wretches, together you are the shame of modern Catholicism. I'm telling you straight, your hate's worse than Bergoglio's critics. You are the shame of modern Catholicism. And they're criticizing, judging, saying this isn't right, that's wrong, will do, give, say this. I'm dubious, we're all dubious. But in union with Pope Francis, with the priests who are enthusiastic about Amoris Laetitia, and you are a disgrace. These martyr priests await you at heaven's gate. They'll ask, but did you go to Mass with heretical priests? Didn't you know? No poor Dominatella's soul shouted it at you. Right? These first victims were Carmelites. Carmelites, how could I do it? Interesting. They were far too few in number. What will Father Fare answer to this? What's the reply? What's Father Fare's argument? That the report's missing, I don't expect it because they're being sly. The formal act of excommunication, of heresy, is missing. Yes, of course, if Pope Francis himself does it. No, let's wait. Cardinal Sarah will. There were Republican sections in Paris, such as those of the Baths of Julian, which refused to support Robespierre's plans by arresting the priests. Sunday the 13th and 15th of August, Assumption Day, didn't feel like holidays because the whole of Paris was accompanied by summary arrests. Although disguised in lay clothes, a few unsworn priests dared to appear, bringing sacraments to the needy. Of being seen on streets, bringing sacraments to those in need. If they abandoned their precarious refuge to seek another, less exposed one at night, they had to fear the numerous patrols, far more zealous in arresting a priest than in defending Paris from its murderers and looters. During the day, you saw gangs of murderers every minute, whose ferocity never seemed greater. That joy of seeing a priest indicated by the people to be arrested. I'm looking at other passages because time is a tyrant. It would be nice to read it in full, because the story of the Jacobin fury against refractory priests and against the refractory people is almost unknown to everyone. Think of the battles in Ireland, for example. Let's look at something else. In the sans-culotte section, not only the motion made on Sunday, the 13th of August, to arrest all the refractory priests, but also the plan to confine them in the San Fermino seminary, where 18 expelled priests were already being held, was received with applause. Who were refractory, and from then on, besieged awaiting death. From 8 in the morning, the gentlemen of San Nicolò, all of whom were unharmed and bound by oath, were dragged along with their seminarians to the house of San Fermino, and despite the assistance and the abundant alms distributed by those gentlemen in those areas, the rabble showed no less zeal in their arrest. One of these priests is Father Bonnet, whose charitable kindness is clearly shown by the following account. In the harsh winter of '88, he gave the poor all he could spare. Nothing more remains to me, he had told his spiritual daughters. I'll go and ask for alms. You've still got that hanky, they said, since you're holding it. Well, here it is. Take it. I can truthfully say I'll have nothing left. Mr. Andrio was brought before the section. Above the community, the seminary rector. On his arrival, like that of the old comrades and the young seminarians, the shouts of a barbaric joy resound in the courtyard of San Fermin, filled with men, women, and children of the rabble. A man yelled from the crowd, "Give 'em here! From today, I'll axe them all." At 3 that day, fiercer screams heralded a greater prize's arrival. They were all the refractory priests from the house of the new converts, who were led in triumph by 50 men armed with bayonets and pikes. Forks, I think they are. Leading all these prisoners was the venerable Father Guérin du Rocher. I believe he's been beatified, known for his true history of time, which amazed the whole world with its theological scholarship. Anyone who knew this author saw in him more than just his vast knowledge. A soul won to God through his catechisms was 1,000 times more precious than all the great reputation he enjoyed. To reveal his knowledge, skill was needed. He'd steer talks to ancient objects or history. That day he seemed, for the first time, to have departed somewhat from his humble simplicity. And in his festive cloak he went gloriously, for he wanted to be the leader, to head the respectable confessors of Jesus Christ, led to martyrdom with him. There he was, this theologian father, wanting to be ahead of the others, wanting to die first to give courage to those who would be killed after him. At his side was his blood brother, a Jesuit like him, who had recently returned from missions in the East and was already beginning to develop a fever. Along with these 2 priest brothers, many other priests arrived, some arrested in their own homes, others in the Abbey of San Vittore, and some even from the hospital of the Proietti, where they had spent many years in acts of charity, serving the poor. Another priest, Father Delavez, was also with them. To conclude, he'd spent 10 years devoting himself entirely to serving the sick and the dying in the hospital. His refusal to swear an oath to the Constitution led to his exclusion from all offices. He was forced to leave the hospital, where his zeal was quite well known. The good qualities of his character had earned him friends among the Jacobins and some fellow confessors, Abbot Copen, a priest among the youngest of a distinguished family. With the sentiments of our valiant knights, he replied to those who spoke to him of the constitutional oath, that is, go to Mass in union with Bergoglio. The Copen family have never broken their word of honor. I gave my word to God, I will keep it. Goodness, what a tale. Abbot Copen, one of the youngest priests taken to prison, will say, when faced with the possibility of signing the Constitution, that those of my Copen family have never broken their word of honor. I too will not, because I pledged my word to God, and I kept it, in fact, until the very end. He had a deadly fever when they entered his house, towards the Lord, you see. Well, no, probably for him it meant something else, because when the guards went to arrest him, and he was already dying, he said, he was dying, and said this, they wanted to lift him up, and he replied, let's go, I'm ready to follow you. And what's so convenient about dying in a bed of honor in Copenhagen? His body's strength, however, didn't match his will. His limbs were just a bare skeleton. He tried in vain to walk, and so was dragged away by those barbarians. On his arrival at the seminary, he must be put back to bed. He lived happily here in prison, as he had wished to be sure that his last sigh would truly be for God. Father Gross, the parish priest, was also included in the same house. Few shepherds earned the respect and love of their people as he did, for he had spent his whole life. I'm putting something here to stop the computer from turning off, but I can't manage it. Let's see if it's like that instead. Right, perfect. I was saying that this was the parish priest, so he was a figure loved by his parishioners, especially by the poor. To please his parishioners, he almost tricked them at the first meeting. He almost signed. Then he realized and finally understood that he couldn't, and he too was taken to prison. So, from the 13th of August, 1792, to the 2nd of September, 1792, the number of priests locked up in the Venuto Talla prison of San Firmino rose to 92. As the goods were transported, damage was done to their homes and belongings. From that moment on, they were no longer allowed to communicate with anyone. They were given the rooms of the 2 foremen of the new factory as lodgings, with 3 guards posted at each end of each corridor, and 3 more in the middle of each, armed with pikes, rifles, and even sabers, in an attempt to discourage any escape. Then the lives of the priests inside this prison are also recounted in detail, and there you see the very grace of God of these 92. Prisoners led to prison first and then to martyrdom. I haven't got time to go over that now because time's moved on, but we'll come back to it. To ask why we celebrated growth on Sunday means you haven't understood a thing. I invite these people, but I say it paternally, because then they say I'm being polemical. They get resentful. Get out of here, now. Because if you're not ready to understand our situation now, imagine tomorrow. We don't need these numbers. 92 priests versus countless thousands who signed the Constitution. Where are they now? 92 priests of hundreds of thousands. Got it? We're 6 priests. There's only one solution. You don't go to Mass with heretics. Anyone in Bergoglio's false church risks eternal damnation. They don't affect you. We need to be in radical opposition, urging people not to attend Masses in union with Pope Francis, as the priests did, as you heard, who said they wanted Mass and then said no. They'd rather do without than see themselves celebrating with a heretic.